Welcome to Geezerology, everybody. We're back today. We're going to talk about the Velvet Underground album, Loaded. This was the fourth album in the Velvet Underground's discography. The band was starting to splinter a little bit. This has Doug Yule, who replaced John Cale. Maureen Tucker, the drummer, actually was not on this album. She was on maternity leave. So this is basically Lou Reed and Doug Yule are the two main players on this album, and the rest is studio musicians. Sterling Morrison, who was a member of the band, was still in the band, still credited, but he didn't participate much in the making of this album for personal reasons. He had other things going on in his life at the time. So a lot of people don't really consider it a proper Velvet Underground album, but it is a Velvet Underground album. There's no doubt about that. Released in November of 1970, just after they completed recording this album in the summer of 1970, Reed left the band. So the band, for all intents and purposes, was done right after this album, before it was even released. And I've been listening to this record for close to half a century. In November was the 50th anniversary of it, and I picked it up a year or two, probably 2 years after that, when I first started listening to it. So it's been in my rotation for a long, long time. Bob knows a little. For the last 50 years, I guess, Bob is not a Velvet Underground fan, never has been, never was a Lou Reed fan. But you know, a lot of these old Velvet Underground songs now, it's like for the last 45 years, you're going to hear some Velvet Underground songs on the radio or in movies or on TV or whatever. So Bob is a little bit familiar with some of their work, but I believe, he'll tell us, but I believe that this might be his first time listening through it. I challenged him to listen to it because I wanted to get his reaction to it and wanted to get an idea of what he thought. So I'm going to ask Bob, thumbs up or thumbs down?
Okay, before I give you that answer, which I know you're just waiting with bated breath to hear, let me say this really, really quickly. You and I were college roommates and early roommates when we started our careers. So living with you, there was no way to escape the Velvet Underground.
That's true.
And so I'm familiar with some of their more well-known stuff. I have always liked Lou Reed as a songwriter. Never really could catch fire with their music. So anyway, I took your challenge and I sat down and I listened to this. And I've listened to it multiple times. And I have to say, how in the hell did I miss this over the last 5 decades? This is damn near a perfect rock and roll record.
Oh,
I love it.
Son of a gun.
Huh?
Son of a gun.
Yes, I really, really do. I surprised myself. And even after listening, and I love the music. Love it. As I said earlier, it's almost a perfect rock and roll record. And I know that they took some heat for it being kind of supposedly a sellout album, but I love it. Who Loves the Sun? Great little Monkees pop sounding kind of song, but the lyrics are dark. It's a great juxtaposition there. Sweet Jane, I mean, one of the best rock and roll guitar riffs around. I've known Sweet Jane for decades. Rock and roll, one of the finest odes to the exuberance and feeling you get from rock and roll music. Cool It Down. It's got kind of a working in the coal mine little vibe thing going on there. New Age. What a bizarre song. You know, I mean, falling in love with a fat old actress. There are some rockers on this album. I mean, great guitar work. I was really surprised at the exuberance of it.
Well, that was side one. How about side two?
Okay, side two dips a little bit. Okay, Lonesome Cowboy Bill, no. Velvet Underground should not try to do country. It doesn't work. Train Round the Bend, love it. And you saw many times here people singing about, I got to get out of the city, I got to get to the country. here's the exact opposite. Screw the country, man. I want to go back to the city. Love that. I Found a Reason. Beautiful, beautiful song. Held Head High. Beautiful. Oh Sweet Nothing. What a great way to end out the album. So I was just really surprised, pleasantly surprised, and kind of angry at myself that I missed it all of those decades. And I wish I would have paid more attention to it.
That surprises me. I thought you might like it. I thought you might be able to grasp it and understand it. I had no idea that I would have never guessed that you would give it such a resoundingly good review there.
It's in my rotation now, and
excellent.
Yeah, Rock and Roll and Sweet Jane. First couple of times I listened to them, something sounded off, and it's just like, and so I went back and I went to the live album and I listened to them on the live album, and I realized that the versions I had been hearing probably throughout the years weren't off the studio album, because there are some differences.
Which live album? There were a few live albums. Which
Right.
live album in particular were you listening to?
Live 69.
Okay.
And so there was just enough subtle differences that I had to listen to the studio version a few times to get comfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then after listening to the original album, I went and I listened to the 45th anniversary remastered one. That kicks ass.
Yeah.
That, yes.
There was you could tell the difference. Listen to it back.
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially listening into it with a really good quality set of headphones. And I know there's been some criticism because Maureen Tucker wasn't drumming, but they got a good replacement. They were good. They were good. There was good drumming on there, and the remastered version, the album just shines more than the original mastering of it. So very pleasantly surprised.
Whoever remastered it did the job that they should have done. That I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I detected a big difference.
Yeah.
And one of the things I had read was that I guess, Reed kind of walked away from the album before it was mixed and mastered.
Right.
And so whoever did the remastering, yes, they did a great job, and it just pops. I mean, it shines.
Yeah. Yeah. Reed walked away. He was done. The manager, before I won't go too far into this, but the manager, Steve Susnick at the time, he decided that they just signed a new record contract with Atlantic Records, and Atlantic Records signed them with the idea, with the directive that you need to give us an album that we can sell. Loaded. The title of the album is Loaded. They basically said this needs to be loaded with hits, and that's how they got the title of the album. But so it took them in a direction that Reed was fine with, but what happened was the manager decided that if they're going to sell this album, they need to make Doug Yule the front man of the group. So the manager got Doug Yule much more involved in this album than Reed cared to live with. So he decided that, okay, he's done. He's going back home to regroup. Well, you mentioned the drumming. The drumming is good. The drumming on this album is actually done by Doug Yule and his younger brother Billy, who was still a high school kid at the time. And the one reason that people really don't, that a lot of diehards really don't believe that this is a true Velvet Underground album is because the difference in the style of the drumming. Because you can tell if you listen to any other Velvet Underground songs with Maureen Tucker's on it, that's Maureen Tucker playing drums, because she basically just had two mallets in her hand and just banged on tom-toms and bass drums. She didn't do snare drums or anything like that. So this is just more of a conventional rock record than rock and roll record that they had ever done before. It's very different than the first three Velvet Underground albums. All four of the Velvet Underground albums sound completely different from each other. They're all completely different styles. And I'll go into that in the blog post later. Maybe we'll talk about that on the video later. Rock and Roll and Sweet Jane are, there's no question. Those are the two best I think those are the two best songs on this album. I don't, but
No doubt.
uh, I love New Age. New Age is one of my favorite Velvet Underground songs, which is sung by Yule. That's Doug Yule singing that. He sings four tracks on this album. I agree with you on Train Around the Bend. I love that. I'm sick of trees. Take me to the city. Some great lines. Nothing that I planted ever seems to grow. It's like,
Well,
I don't want anything to do with this rural life. I want to go back to the city. And that's basically what this album is. It's just, if you look at it, it's the whole album is basically just a very, very urban album. The themes of all the songs are something to do with urban life. The style of the song, I Found a Reason, which is that old doo-wop song, which is the stuff you used to hear on the street corners of Philadelphia and New York. I mean, that's where that style came from. And coming out at a time when bands like Poco and Crosby, Stills and Nash and where what I call rural rock was really taking hold here. This is just the opposite and pushback on that. It's fantastic.
And with New Age, Lou Reed has supplanted what I think is one of the best opening lines in a song. I used to give that nod to Honky Tonk Women. I met a gin sunk barroom queen in Memphis, and she tried to take me upstairs for a ride. Here they're singing about falling in love with a fat blonde actress. Yeah, what a great opening.
Well, the opening line is, "Can I have your autograph?"
Yes.
Can I have your autograph? He said to the fat blonde actress.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know,
and I take it to mean that it's not a love song. He's basically stalking her. That's what I take those lyrics to mean. He's somebody who saw up on the silver screen and he's stalking her.
So is it like he saw her when she was young and beautiful and is now stalking her later in real life? Because I wanted to ask you about that song.
Yeah, you know what? Yeah, I never thought that deeply about it, but yeah, that yes, that makes perfect sense. Can I have your autograph? He said to the fat blonde actress. I've seen everything you've done, from Paths of Pain to Jewels of Glory, which basically saying he's been watching her movies for a long, long time is basically what that's saying. So yeah, probably so. He probably got obsessed with a 1940s screen star, and then he finally met her in the 1960s, and she put on a little weight.
Did not age well.
Yeah.
What was it? Was he singing about an actual real actress, or was it just something made up? Or do you know?
I have never heard that that's about anybody in particular. Mm-hmm. I think it's probably just a song he wrote, which Reed has written about a lot of specific subjects, but he also was very adamant that sometimes he's just writing a song that it has no basis in any kind of, there's no biographical content in it. There's no basis in any factual thing or anything like that. Sometimes he's just writing a song. He may have read a novel and that was a scene in the novel or something, and he wrote a song about it.
All right. Couple questions for you about it.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so I'm reading all of these things about how they sold out. True Velvet fans maybe not necessarily like it because it's not dark and moody like some of the others. I don't see it as a sellout. There's still a lot of subversive stuff in these songs, even though they're bright and rock and roll oriented. So do you think it's a sellout?
No, it was a band. It was a band trying to make its way in the world, and they weren't getting anywhere. I mean, there was not. you know, they didn't have a very big fan base. They never sold many records,
Right.
and that's one of the reasons why Reed finally decided enough of this. I can't do this anymore. I've got to rethink this. And why the record company gave him this directive on what kind of record to make before they would agree to sign him, and why this manager was moving there. But no, I never considered this as a sellout. I just considered it as a band that's a band that was starting to fragment. Like I say, Maureen Tucker wasn't there, but she was off starting a family. She hadn't quit, but she was off starting a family, so it was taking some time off. Sterling Morrison was drifting away. He was going off to college and resuming his college studies, so he was losing interest in the band. And I think at this time it was just Reed trying to figure out where he was going with his career, and Steve Sesnick and Doug Yule were trying to pull him in a direction that he didn't want to go. But he went there willingly. He decided at some point, no, this is not what I want to do. In retrospect, history says that no, this wasn't a sellout. This was an essential Velvet Underground album. If all of a sudden they had done 2 or 3 albums that were pretty much the same and moving in one direction, and all of a sudden if this was like a sharp right turn, completely different than anything they'd ever done before, I could see where you might think that. But that's not what they were. I mean, they had 4 albums, and all 4 albums went off in completely different directions. So they were feeling their way. They were trying to figure out how to make a living, and nobody was buying their records. I mean, understand, it was years. It was a good decade after this before the Velvet Underground started getting some mainstream acceptance, and that's because Reed had made a couple of successful solo albums by this time, which started getting people back onto what his previous career was.
Well, after delving into Loaded, I went back and I took a look at their other 3 albums, and I pulled out some songs here and there, and I see this as a refinement of where they were going. And you're the expert, so correct me if I'm misinterpreting this. Loaded seems like an extension of their 3rd album, the self-titled Velvet Underground 3rd album, because that album got more positive. You had Beginning to See the Light, Jesus. It was a little folkier. So this, to me, Loaded seems like an extension of that 3rd album. Right or wrong?
Yeah, I think it was a continuation of the direction they were moving. Before the 3rd album, John Cale left out the 2nd album, and Cale was the guy who put all the really avant-garde, way out there stuff in there, because he was a real musical student and a student of the avant-garde. and Reed was trying to go in a more mainstream direction, and they butted heads. They started butting heads over, okay, which way are we going to go? And Reed finally prevailed on Cale to go away, let me do my thing, and hired Doug Yule. And the 3rd album came out, and they were all more straight ahead. I don't want to say pop songs, but just more straight ahead songs on the 3rd album, more introspective than they'd been before. This became the 3rd album was more of was probably of the 4 albums, the 3rd album was probably closest to anything to a Lou Reed solo album. This was just Lou Reed writing a lot of songs, 3 and 4 minute songs, getting introspective about it, and basically going into singer-songwriter mode with the backing band. Without the Cale influence. Now Reed did see the other 3 people as his backing band. and then what happened with Loaded was they signed with a major label,
Right.
Atlantic Records. They were with MGM Verve. They actually went to a studio after the third album to record another album, but it laid down a few tracks. But then MGM pulled the plug and dropped them. They had a management change, and MGM pulled the plug and dropped them. So they abandoned those. They went into this, and then they got signed by Atlantic Records. And Atlantic Records, they had they had better studio equipment. They had better they had better staff producers. It was just, and so it turned out to be a much more slickly produced version of the third album.
So what about Reed personally? Did he go on any kind of a personal journey of change or anything over the course of these albums?
Over the course of these 4 albums, the Velvet Underground albums,
Yeah.
You're not talking about a solo career. You're talking about the Velvet Underground.
The 4 Velvet albums.
No, it's Reed wanted to be in a mainstream band. Reed wanted to make some hits. He didn't want to. He wasn't there to compromise and become like the next Beach Boys or anything like that. He wanted to be Lou Reed. He wanted the Velvet Underground to be the Velvet Underground, but he wanted to figure out a way to get in the mainstream and to sell some records.
Because I'm looking at.
Go ahead. You're looking.
Question. Okay. Now, admittedly, I'm coming from a beginner's journey here, but a theme that I saw consistently through those 4 albums was a theme of salvation. Starting out, salvation through drugs, that type of thing, and then morphing into a spiritual, musical salvation thing. Because we go from heroin and the rush and the feeling and everything that he gets from heroin to I'm beginning to see the light. And now I don't know whether he turned Christian or not, or whether Jesus was a serious song or a parody, but it sounds serious. So we go from the redemption and salvation of drugs to spiritual to music. So it seemed to me that there had to have been, and I don't know Reed's life, but it seems to me there's a transition taking place there in his life that's being mirrored in the songs that he's writing.
I don't think so. I think it was just where his head was at as a songwriter.
Come on, man! I got a great theory there.
Well, I've read I've read at least 3 Reed biographies, and I've studied him well over the years. And no, Reed was a calculating guy. Reed wasn't. He was a calculating guy. He did what he thought. Everything he did had a purpose behind it. It wasn't always a legitimate purpose, and a lot of times he made some bad moves because he wasn't thinking in the right way. But
so he was a poser.
He wasn't a poser. He was a songwriter. He thought of himself first and foremost as a songwriter, and one of his the thing he was most proud of is that he could write a song about anything. He could write a song. He could write a song that he wanted to write. He could write a song about what was going on in his personal life. He could write a song about something he read in a newspaper. He could write a song if you gave him a subject, said write a song about it. He could write a song about it. That was what he was. He was a songwriter, and he was a professional songwriter. And
so when he's writing, I'm waiting for my man, and he's writing heroin, we're not actually talking about him slinking into the ghetto to buy a fix.
No, he was being a journalist. He was being a journalist. A lot of that. No, he was being a journalist, and look at where he was hanging out at the time. They were hanging out at Warhol's factory with all the all the freaks and and those and the drug
So he's
addicts
more
and
writing
all,
about
and all
what
them
he,
hanging around there, and he's watching them. He's writing what he sees. He's not writing
so
what
he's
he
writing
thinks.
what he
He's
sees,
writing what he
not
sees.
necessarily what he's doing.
Right, right,
Okay.
right. Walking the Wild Side came from that same period. He was just he was writing about all the characters that he was seeing around him. Candy Says on the lead track of the third album. Here, not so much here on Unloaded. He's just there's nothing particularly he's writing about Unloaded. He's just writing some rock and roll songs, trying to write a couple of hits. That's what Loaded is all about.
Wow, Scott, your cynicism is destroying my mood.
How's that? You had this whole biography written in your head about what was going on with Reed at the time.
Yes, and I'm listening to this joyous, exuberant album, and I'm thinking, and now it's just like, oh, it was just a calculated thing.
Yeah, he was always calculated. Everything he did was calculated. Which is one of the some people dismiss him because of that. Some people think he was very brilliant because of that. Yeah, he was a songwriter. That was what he took his most pride
So you're
in.
saying if he was still alive, he could be a news writer for Fox News?
Well, yeah, I'm not going to say he's a liar. He would tell tall fiction. He would tell tall fiction sometimes, but that was just the way he would see it. So what if you had do you have any criticisms at all about this album, about anything that didn't particularly work? Or
Yes, like I said earlier, Lonesome Cowboy Bill. I'm sorry, I just thought it was incredibly stupid.
No, just bad. Yeah, that's not one of their more well remembered songs. Yeah.
Now, if I were listening to it on a DVD, if that's a CD rather, if that started, I'd hit skip and just leave it by. Sorry, they just don't do country rock,
No.
and it
Well,
just
I wouldn't. Yeah, I wouldn't really call that country rock though. It has a little bit of a country flavor to it, but
I just thought it was a dumb song.
It is a dumb song, yeah.
And they tried to put a little country thing in it, and I just didn't think it worked. I think other than that, I think every song stands out really well. That's just the one that I would skip. And if I was burning it to an iPod, I wouldn't burn that song.
Okay.
And let's see.
The middle section where I found a reason, which is just a straight street corner doo-wop song, right? And that middle section where Reed does that middle section where he does that where he does the talking, I don't know what you call it, where he just goes into talking middle section like just in those classic doo-wop songs. I just every time I hear that, I find it hilarious. he just nails it. And thinking of Lou Reed is like being one of the Everly Brothers, and doing that cheesy middle section where he talks through this really emotional little teenage love thing. It's just I always find that hilarious.
Well, and then that raises the question: is the song "Rock and Roll" autobiographical?
I never took it as autobiographical.
Well, I've read about a lot of Lou Reed's doo-wop influences. And that's the music of New York. That's what he listened to as a kid growing up. Right. So I kind of wondered if rock and roll wasn't autobiographical. Instead of writing about himself, he invents the girl.
Possibly, the acorn never falls too far from the tree. Yeah, I mean, I could take that. I could take that as probably that probably does come straight from his heart, you know. Because that's when he was a kid. I mean, he had a troubled childhood. He was born into he was born into a middle class family. I mean, but he had a troubled childhood because he was such a weird little kid, and his back in the late 40s and into the 50s, and some of the things he was doing back then wasn't acceptable for little kids, and they put him in shock therapy trying to straighten him out everything. So he had a troubled childhood. So that's pretty much how he became Lou Reed, was that he would just shut himself off in his bedroom and just listen to rock and roll records all the time.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I was aware of the Velvet Underground. I always thought Lou Reed was a fantastic songwriter. The reason that I never paid a lot of attention to Velvet music is I never really sat down and just dug into it like I did this time. So I would hear it, and my first impression was that they were amateurs at their instruments. And the music itself never caught fire with me. Mm-hmm. So that's why I never paid attention to them. Although the songs that I heard, I loved the lyrics, and I always thought Reed was a great songwriter. I just couldn't get into the music because it struck me as being kind of amateurish. But sitting down and forcing myself to really listen to this and pay attention, especially when I got to the remastered stuff, I gained a new appreciation for what they were doing musically. And I went back, and like I said, and I pulled a few cuts here and there off of the earlier albums just to see if there was a difference. And I had read about how they were doing all of these weird avant-garde sounds. I didn't hear it in the cuts that I pulled out. Of course, I pulled out the cuts that I already knew. I listened to Heroin again, Waiting for My Man, Candy Says, some of those, and they didn't sound that weird. Maybe I need to dig in deeper, but I do have
Heroin was a little out there.
And maybe in terms of the lyrics, but I didn't think it was that far out there musically.
That middle section where Cale starts doing a freak out on viola, and Mo Tucker is just pounding the hell out of those tom-toms.
But not as weird as some stuff I've heard.
Well, no. But this was in 1966. That was out there. Now it's not. But in 1966, that was out there.
But I'm listening to.
Yeah. But anyway, my point there is that you obviously didn't pull any tracks from the second album.
White Light, White Heat.
White Light, White Heat.
I listened to White Light, White Heat. That was a song I knew.
Well, that's the most conventional song on the album.
Yeah. So, like I say, I've got to do a deeper dive. I got to do into the deep cuts.
We might have to have the same conversation. We won't do it immediately, but we're going to have the same conversation here pretty far down the road, or not far down the road, but pretty soon on White Light, White Heat, because that's the complete flip side of this album you just listened to.
So
it's a polar opposite.
Here's my question for you.
Yeah.
Why in the hell didn't you force me to do this back in the 70s when we lived together?
Yeah, sometimes people just don't want to listen,
That's true. I never really took you seriously. So.
Anything else you want to say about Loaded, Bob?
Other than I love it. I surprised myself.
I'm so happy. I expected that you might like it, but I expected a more tepid response than I got. That makes me happy.
Got to keep them guessing.
I have a lot more. I have a lot more to say about Loaded, but we won't go here. I mean, like I said, I've been listening to this album close to 50 years. I'm probably going to do a blog post on the Velvet Underground fairly soon. Within the next couple of weeks, I'll pull something together, because I'm eventually going to have to get into a Reed solo career, which is where my more interest lies there, just because I got into the Velvet Underground just because through the back door, through becoming a fan of Reed's early solo work. Bob, you working on anything good for this week?
Well, I've got something that I'm doing. few weeks back, I wrote about a young man that I know personally named Hunter Mounts, who's trying to get a career going in country music. Hunter contacted me a couple days ago. He's got a new single coming out next week, and he sent me an advance copy of it. And I got a chance to talk to him about his whole songwriting process and how this thing got put together. So I think I'm going to do something about how somebody actually sits down and writes a song and how they put it together. It's kind of interesting. So I think I'm going to work on that.
That'll be great. That'll be great. That'll give us an insight we usually don't get on these kinds.
Exactly, because he sent me the single and asked me if I would write about it, and I said, well, I need something to work with here. So I said, hey, tell me how you came up with the song, and it's got some good lines and stuff in it. So he said, hey, he gave me the whole things about how he sits down with his songwriting partners, and they took 1, 2 or 3 words and built a whole song out of it. It's kind of an interest. I think it might be a little interesting look into the creative process.
Oh, that'll be cool. I'm looking forward to it. Anything else? Or is that pretty much going to fill? Yeah.
Well, I have hit what every writer dreads. I've hit a bad case of writer's block, and I've got 3 or 4 things I'm working on, and they just all seem to have hit a brick wall. So I need to regroup and find my creative juices. I think living in the deep freeze for a couple of weeks has frozen my brain.
Yeah, well, we have other things going on in life.
There's a lot of other stuff.
We're not full-time writers. That's fine. That's fine.
But I got more ideas than I know what to do with. Okay. So
Well, yeah, that's it. I have a lot of ideas, but I think probably the Velvet Underground, if not my next piece, will be within my next 2 or 3 pieces. Sometime in the next week or 2, we'll get into Velvets. I have a couple other things I'm kicking around that I'm probably going to get to this week. But yeah, we're working, and we'll talk a little bit later about what we want to do for our video next week. Okay. And once we figure that out, we'll let you know what's coming up.
All right.
Okay, everybody. Bob, it was nice talking to you.
Same here,
Stay
Scott.
warm there in Missouri, and I'll try to stay cool here in South Florida.
All right.
And we'll see everybody next week.
All right. Take care, everybody. Thanks for listening.
See you, Bob.
All right. See you, Scott.